Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from today, and welcome to another Hasselblad webinar. My name is Mark Whitney. I'm part of the Hasselblad European marketing team, and today we've got an interview and chat with Hasselblad Ambassador Julia Fullerton Batten. Just before we meet Julia, if I can just go through some of the housekeeping. So this webinar will be recorded. So if you want to look it back or look at any of Hasselblad's previous webinars over the last few months, they're all on the Hasselblad YouTube page, so please have a look there. And the agenda for today, quite simple, just meet Julia in a few seconds, have a little introduction to her, and then have a look through some of her work as the main body of the webinar. We estimate this to be sort of 50 minutes, maybe 45. And hopefully leave some time at the end for some questions and answers. So if you want to get your questions in using the webinar control panel down the side, and we'll collate the images and try to ask as many possible throughout the webinar. So let's meet Julia. Are you there, Julia?
Hi, Mark.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, and you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, I understand it's a bit cold in London at the moment.
It is. It's grey and cold, but that's all right. I quite like the winter. It's quite, yeah, quite cozy.
Okay. And one of the questions I ask on this series of webinars, obviously the coronavirus, the COVID, and how has that period been for you for the last few months?
Well, I think like for everybody, it's been a really, really, we've had a really tough time with it. I think when COVID happened and it came to London and we were all in kind of lockdown, I've got 2 kids, I was homeschooling. It's just a very, very surreal time. And I didn't really, obviously we all stopped, all photographers stopped working, everybody pretty much stopped working, and or were furloughed or had to work from home. And I thought, well, what can I do as a photographer? I felt I had to record in a way this kind of time in our lives that we've never experienced before. And I shot a project, and it helped me, to be honest. It helped me in a way that I had something to do. I did something that I feel was for the world, or kind of showing awareness. And also the people that I was photographing were, you know, they really enjoyed the photo shoot, and I've won a lot of awards with it now. So I'm really glad I did it. And I am still continuing. In fact, I've just picked it up again because we've had our it's just when I see interesting people through their windows, I'm like, oh, maybe I could just photograph this person and add it to the project, add that person to the project.
Yeah. So was this an idea that sort of come quite quickly to you, or did you have to sort of think quite hard about the best way to represent these times?
Well, I've got a very cinematic style, and I just thought, how can I record, or how can I capture this with my style of photography without going too off-piste? So this is the closest I go to reportage in a way, because all my locations are set up, all the people are, you know, brought in. I work a lot with props and styling and wardrobe, and you know, I construct things from pretty much nothing. And first I photographed people just randomly on the street, because it was so unusual to have people wearing masks. I mean, now it's kind of normal for us, isn't it? I think this is the future now. And I was photographing people wearing masks, and also masks that people had dropped on the streets, because that was, for some reason, there was litter everywhere. You know, it was a little bit like people didn't know really what to do with their masks and just kind of threw them on the ground. So, and then I thought, that's not really my style. And I'm a huge Edward Hopper fan, and I've always loved the kind of juxtaposition of shooting through a window, as in like some people being framed through, it's like a picture within a picture. And I thought, I'm just going to photograph people through their windows, because that's what I saw when I was walking the empty streets. I was seeing people looking forlornly out of their windows, and to me, it just came the most natural to do this kind of setup. When I mean setup, I mean they are people in their own windows, but they're lit. They're quite stylized, and they're constructed with my lighting.
Mm. So how did you select the people? Are they people you know, or are they strangers that you've approached?
So first I put like ads out in our local kind of newspaper and in our kind of newsletter media, and so many people came forward. So to begin with, I just photographed anybody, because it was just like, okay, let's bring it on, let's do it. And I went off on my own and carried the camera and a tripod and some lighting. And then after a while, I was like shooting every three days. I realized, hang on, I need some help here. And I'm so used to working with such a large team of assistants. And of course, I couldn't contact anybody because, you know, those were the rules. And I had to stay very close to home as well. So it was in my area in West London in Chiswick. And so I dragged my 12-year-old son and to help me carry everything and help set up. So the two of us just kind of went to each shoot, and he got a bit frustrated and a bit bored in the end, because to begin with it took maybe an hour, but after a while I became more comfortable with the idea, and I started bringing in props and clothing I put people in, and the lighting got more elaborate. And you know, to begin with was 1 hour, and then it was sort of 4 or 5 hours. And of course I couldn't, you know, you have to go to bed, because that was in the summer, and it didn't get dark till about 9:30, 10.
Mm.
I mean, I did a
Yep.
shoot the other day. It was dark at 3. It was like, I got there at 1, and 2 hours later, it was like, oh my God, I've got to get a move on now.
Okay, and then there's another project you've been shooting very recently as well. So during sort of the periods of lockdown and social sort of distancing restrictions. So can you tell us a bit more about these images?
Well, this is a brand new project on contortionism, and I've always been, you know, becoming a little bit older now. I'm a middle-aged woman. I'm less flexible. I still do my yoga, try and do yoga 5 times a week, but I'm just very intrigued by these young girls who are still doing this kind of, I don't know what you call it. It's not really a sport. I maybe just call it an activity. I guess it is a sport. It's like yeah, because it's hard work, and this has been going on for centuries. And I mean, these girls are born with extreme flexible spines and joints, but it's what they are drawn to. And most of them are gymnasts or dancers, but then they're taking their contortionism very, very seriously. And you know, in the olden days, people used to do this kind of in the circus and in Mongolia and China, and it was in the kind of Roman circus that you'd see these kind of very odd performances, like nearly to shock people. They would be just so extreme. And I read something the other day. There was apparently one of the first contortionists was a guy begging, and he was just a producer discovered him, and he was doing these contortionist moves. He's incredibly flexible, and they picked him up from the street, threw him in the circus, and started working as a performer. And I just thought that's such an interesting story. So also because of kind of lockdown and you know the restricted numbers we can be, and I'm used to working with such a large set and with so many people, I thought, what can I do in this time where, you know, I'm just working, you know, one-to-one. I'm only photographing one person, not a whole big team of people. And yeah, that's a behind-the-scenes image of how we are now. Unfortunately, everybody having to wear masks and, you know, needing extra protection. Everything takes much longer on the shoots because we have to, you know, we have to clean everything. We have to take people's temperature readings, and it's just become a pain in the backside, to be honest. But hopefully it'll be over this soon, and it can go back to normality. But I'm afraid I fear it will be like this for a while.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take a couple of steps back and look at you as a photographer. So I've got a few bullet points here. So you're UK based, but originally you were born in Germany, and you've spent some time in the US as well, I believe.
Yeah.
So how did you get started out on your path in photography?
I always loved photography, but it was my father who introduced me, because this is when we were living in America. We were living in Pennsylvania, and he would go to New York City and run down the streets chasing beautiful women, running after them and photographing sometimes their full body, sometimes just their legs. Really beautiful photographs, quite reportage, not set up at all, kind of just grabbing moments. I think he once followed this, he tells me this story where he once followed 2 models and a photographer, and he started pointing the camera also at these models, and I think the photographer began to get a little bit irritated by him, because he was probably, I don't know, there was another photographer there who was also taking photographs of his models. But anyway, he used to come back and process the film and do his own printing, and I was just completely amazed and intrigued how, you know, you could photograph something and capture it on, of course it was film then, and then process the film and then print it on paper. And I just thought that was quite incredible. And that's what I decided I wanted to do. I didn't know at the time that I can actually make a living being a photographer. So I didn't think, oh, what am I going to do as a profession? I thought I might become a nurse, because I really love caring for people. I never thought in a million years I could become a photographer. But at that time, I thought, well, I'm so passionate about photography. When we actually moved to England, I studied photography, and then I moved to London to become a photographic assistant. And I assisted for about 5 years to many different photographers. And that was really interesting. I learned a lot about, gosh, everything, technical stuff about lighting, cameras. I mean, we used to have a whole day to pre-light a set, because I worked for advertising photographers mainly. And it was cars, still life, people, fashion. I think I worked on a porn set once as well. And I just really, really loved it. And then I started taking my own pictures, and they won some awards. And I entered them into the AOP Assistance Awards, and they won. I got a front cover of the book, and then I got picked up by a German agent quite quickly, and I was kind of set up. So I started off doing commercial photography. And then I started getting a little bit frustrated by, you know, clients kind of going, oh, we want your style, but here's the brief, because you have a layout and you have to follow the layout. And sometimes I was very restricted, let's put it that way, in a way that I have a certain style that I was developing at the time, but they wanted it more daylight or more lit differently. They wanted people to look very happy. And it's hard to take photographs of happy people, because I think sometimes it can also look quite cheesy. And then I started taking my own projects. I started doing my own shoots, like completely just for myself. And I entered this competition. I mean, one of them was the Hasselblad, but before that was the HSBC Awards. And I won and got a book published. And part of the winning award was to have the work exhibited in different galleries around the world for that year. I was pregnant at the time, so unfortunately I couldn't travel to New York, but that kind of set me off as a fine art photographer.
Okay, and for your current sort of work balance, you're split between sort of your own personal projects and sort of commissioned work. So what sort of balance do you have, or what would you ideally like in that in terms of that balance?
Well, not everyone books me for my style of photography because it has got a certain look. And what I love the most is really shooting my own art projects. So it is, I would say, probably 80% art and 20% advertising.
Mhm.
And then with my artwork, I then exhibit the work and sell them as limited edition signed art prints. And yeah, I've got various galleries who show the work, and they take the work to art fairs, and that's the world that I love. I give talks, and I get to travel. Well, before COVID, I would travel to amazing places like Korea and Japan, and I was in China a year ago, and just really enjoy being. It's interesting because when you're an art photographer, you're treated a little bit like celebrity, because you arrive there and you know, I might not be well known in China at all, but they just kind of, all these people come on board and they take you out and they wine and dine you, and you give talks and they show your work, and I love it. It's a real buzz. And then the commercial side is great as well, because it's someone else's budget, because they, you know, they're funding it. It's not what I'm spending. And I have much more of a collaboration with a creative rather than just working on my own. And that's really nice, because it's just refreshing after spending a long time doing my own shoots and kind of working on ideas by myself. It's really lovely to work with somebody, with a creative director, and work on a concept and on an idea that a client needs to be fulfilled for their brand, for their product.
Okay, so as a Hasselblad webinar, it would be wrong for us not to mention what camera you use. So this is your the 100 megapixel H6D that you use for most of your shoots and projects. So one of the questions we get a lot is sort of what lenses do you normally use? So what's in your kit bag?
I love slightly wider than a standard lens. So it tends to be a 50mm, and sometimes if I'm in a confined space, it'll be a 30mm. And sometimes I just have a zoom lens on. So I just stick a zoom lens on and just, you know, anything from 28 to 80, and just look at that. And then I go to the prime lens afterwards, or I keep the zoom lens on. I mean, I always shoot from I never handhold, so I shoot from a tripod and create my sets and the look within that. So once the camera is set and you know, I've chosen my angle and what lens I'm going to be on, I don't touch it or change it. But yeah, I'd say slightly wide, and that's even when I shoot close-up portraits as well. There's something quite lovely, you know, shooting with the 50mm lens, you know, quite close up. But people don't distort, but they just look slightly. It looks slightly just different than a long lens. I just prefer it, and I also like everything sharp from front to back.
Okay.
So I tend to shoot like f16, f11, f16, because I quite like that slightly painterly look that is kind of sharp front to back. Often, yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to some of your images. So I think we're going to get a really good insight today into sort of your thought process and that goes behind the planning of each of your shoots. So yeah, if you could tell us a little bit more about this image, and then we've got some of the inspirational images that you use to help get to where you finished up.
I was shooting a project titled Old Father Thames, and actually took me, normally a project takes me about a year, but this took me 3 years to produce and create. And one of the stories is bathers at Tower Bridge. And as I was doing the great thing about the River Thames is that it's 200-something mile long, and there's so many historical stories along it, but I was interested in the really surreal ones. And this is something that we just don't see anymore. It's people sunbathing and actually swimming at the foreshore of the Tower Bridge. Now, in London, the the River Thames is tidal, and it changes really fast. And as I was doing the research, I came across these amazing, beautiful black and white images that they could have been any time between sort of 30s and 70s, and because that's when the foreshore was open. And they actually brought in, they imported sand so that people could actually sunbathe by the Tower Bridge. And I thought that was so fascinating. I also love vintage clothing. And I thought that was so kind of such a lovely story and lovely scenes that I found. There are many more that I'm showing in this talk. That I thought I've got to create it. However, this area is only open once a year to mudlarkers. So mudlarking is when you go at low tide, you normally have to put on your Wellington boots and you look for artifacts, you know, like old coins or, and you always find something. It could be old coins, it can be, weirdly enough, cow bones. Now and then you might discover a human skull, which is quite scary. It didn't happen to me, luckily, but it's happened to a friend of mine who's a mudlarker. And I got permission to shoot there, but I wasn't allowed to have, you know, 60, 70 odd people in this location. So I then had to, well, I try and shoot everything in camera. That's for me, first and foremost, but with some ideas, I just can't. So I hired a studio for, I think it was 3 or 4 days, and created quite a big sand pit in the studio so that people could actually stand in the sand, and we could bring in all these props. You'll see a Punch and Judy, an ice cream vendor, things that used to happen at the foreshore, and people used to hire these deck chairs and bring their flask. And yeah, we created in the studio, and I had to create the lighting of the sun, which is quite hard, in the studio, and then this had to be comped in. I don't do my own retouching, but yeah, it was quite a big, took a long time to set this up, because I had to look for, you know, the right kind of people who suited this kind of look, that had that kind of slightly vintage vibe about them. And the clothing is kind of 1940s, 1950s, and that took quite a while. And then photographing them all in the studio and then putting them all together. I really enjoyed it. It was fun.
And we got a question from Shashir, actually. He's actually very complimentary on your color grading. He's asked if you could explain a little bit more about your post-processing.
Well, with this Hasselblad, it's got a 16-bit color, which does give you more depth and color or tonal accuracy, which is great. And I don't do my own retouching, so when I hand this over to the retouchers, they always love it because there's such a wider range. I'm just very careful with selecting my color palettes for the shoot, and I think we might have desaturated some of the colors and might have enhanced others. But again, I oversee the retouching. I don't have the patience to sit and retouch my own images, because I'd much rather be taking pictures, because I spend far too much time in front of a computer anyway, having to do all the production and research and everything. Yeah. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you. So let's move on. So what's the story behind this image?
So this is the flooding. Again, this is part of the River Thames, but obviously the river has now come into Tate Britain. So before we had, it was before we had the Thames Barrier, which was erected around 1984. The River Thames used to flood on a regular basis, and there was one occasion where it actually flooded Tate Britain. And I thought this was such an interesting story. And again, these historical references of these men who were woken up, I think, at something like 4 in the morning and had to quickly get all these precious, amazing paintings out of. Now, this was in this, they were all in storage. It didn't flood so much that it actually affected this gallery space. But me, with my kind of creative vision and what looks best visually, I actually set it up in the gallery space. But just imagine all these, anybody had to come along and just basically fish out all these old, very expensive paintings, and most of them actually recovered. And one of them, I forget which painter it was, they spent years and years recovering it and bringing it back to how it used to look. And they only just completed it, I think, like something like 5 years ago. Now the water is done with CGI. So I brought in all these older men to recreate the scene. Obviously, I wasn't allowed to take the main paintings they're holding off the wall, so I had to hire my own props. And again, I work closely with a stylist who brings in all this kind of vintage clothing to help tell the story, and all the old boots that they're wearing and waders. And yeah, it took us, I think we can only access the gallery at 10 in the evening. So we arrived at 10 in the evening, and then we had to go through all the corridors and up a lift. And it took us 2 hours just to get all the equipment and all the props into this gallery space. And then I shot probably for about 5-6 hours, and then we had to get everything back out again. So we didn't finish till something like 4 in the morning. And that's kind of all our equipment laid out in the next room that we're not shooting in. And just to show, I mean, it's not all there, but to show kind of the scale of lighting that I have to bring in to create this kind of look.
And you rent your lighting for each shoot, do you? Obviously, when you've got such large amounts, and you can tailor it to each shoot, I guess.
Yeah, I rent the lighting. I mean, I own some flash heads. Gosh, I used to have these really old Elinchrom heads, but they were like 25 years old. I just got rid of them recently. Yeah, I hire loads of pro photos. I own a few, and I keep them in a storage space. I don't want them in the house. And then we come with you know, a whole huge truckload just for the equipment, and then a separate van for the props and other things as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the scale of your shoots is amazing. The work that goes into it. So we've got another one here. So the same project, same series?
It is. It's still part of the River Thames project. I didn't want to show too many different projects. I just thought I'd concentrate on 2 or 3. This is something that still happens now. It's a tradition that happens in London or around London, well, along the whole River Thames. It's called Swan Upping. And men go out, and it happens in the second week in July. And the men go out and they catch the swans, and it's basically to protect them. They check them over, they weigh them, they check that they've got no diseases, and they all apparently belong to the queen. So they kind of give them a little tag, and then they release them again. And again, I thought this was such an interesting story, and I've seen it happen. I mean, you kind of see it when you're walking along the river, and you see these guys going out and catching the swans, and it's quite amazing because I think swans can be quite dangerous. And what I really loved is the original clothing that these men used to wear, which remind me a little bit of the designer Jean-Paul Gaultier, who had this kind of sailor look rather than the look that they have now, which is they're just red uniforms, and the men are a bit older. So I've made it probably a little bit fashiony, chosen some beautiful men, I hired the swan from a swan trainer and created the scene by the river. We only had one swan, and again, I didn't know on the day if, I mean, I warned the guys. I said, you might have to hold a swan, and there will be a swan in our location, but you know, are you comfortable with it? But there's one thing saying yes, and then there's another thing actually having to physically carry these quite heavy things. But luckily, the guys that I needed to carry it were quite comfortable with it. This was a tricky one because we were running out of time, and the tide caught us. And before I knew it, well, the camera, I don't dare say it, but the camera was nearly underwater. I mean, I was kind of shooting on the tripod, and I was wearing waders anyway, but the water just came in so fast that we just had to get all the equipment off and all the boats and everybody off, because it just happened very, very fast. But yeah, it was quite a fun one to create.
And so notice there in that behind the scenes image, you used the waist level finder on the H6. Is that your personal preference? Is there any reason why you like to use that?
I love the waist level viewfinder because you can kind of shoot from the hip. Well, that's if you're hand holding, you know, the camera. But imagine I had the other viewfinder, I'd have to be crouching down to look through it. So it's really lovely looking down it. And when you look down the viewfinder, you can kind of look up without having to move the camera away from your face. So you can actually interact with the people much more. I mean, as I mentioned, that doesn't, you know, it's a little bit different with me because once it's on the tripod, I tend then not to look through the viewfinder. But to begin with, when I'm looking for my angles and creating the scene before it's on the tripod, I want to look through the viewfinder and kind of put people in position, and then I stick the camera on the tripod, and then that's it. Then I shoot tethered and to a laptop, and then the laptop is attached to an ISO, so I can look at it as a very large screen, because everything that's in the frame is important to me, and if it's not meant to be there, it just gets removed. This obviously more in interiors rather than outside. I mean, I can't move a tree. Just chop that tree down for me, will you? Yeah, I love the way. I mean, gosh, I've had the Hasselblad ever since I started photography, and I've always had the waist level viewfinder. I mean, I used to have a film back then. I used to put on the 501 and the 503, and I always had the waist level viewfinder. I much preferred it than having it smack in front of my face. It's kind of, I feel it's kind of, you can hide it a bit more as well. Like if you're hand holding, you can just kind of look down, and people aren't really aware that you're really holding a camera because they can still see your face.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. I've got a question from Jonathan, actually, if I could just squeeze that in. So he's saying, when shooting a series of images, do you choose to make the images public as you go along, or do you try and complete the series and then sort of publish all of the images at once?
Oh, that's a very good question. In the past, I've always shot a whole project first, and then I would give it to my gallery, and then I'll give it to the press, and then I'll kind of announce that I've got this new project. And I think as an art photographer, that is probably the best way to go. However, for some reason, with my Contortionist series, I'm still shooting the Contortionist, but I'm already releasing the images as and when they're ready, kind of thing. So this time I did that differently. Now with the Old Father Thames, which took 3 years, I think I did it. I released it. I can't remember if I did it all in one go at the end. I think I held on to them for quite a long time, but then I was still shooting more and added to it. Because I think with this project, with the Old Father Thames, it was quite different than some of my earlier work. So some of my earlier work, Like, for example, I did a series on sex workers, about their lives and why they've chosen this career, even though they're well-educated women. But with that, I had to shoot it all in one kind of 3-4 days, because we constructed these sets in a huge studio, and I had to shoot it back to back. So I spent nearly a year producing the work, and then 4 really intense days shooting these women in the studio. And that's the same also with some of my other projects, the older work. But because of the way the River Thames, I wanted to shoot this Swan Upping in July. I wanted to shoot certain things in the certain seasons, and I could only produce 1 shoot a day, and each setup was quite elaborate to set up. Whereas with some of my other project, I would set it all up, organize it all, and then have really intense day at the end. So yes, I would normally hold on to a project and then release it right at the end, and then kind of do this kind of big announcement. But with the Contortionist, I feel like it's a smaller project for me. Don't know why, but I'm releasing them in drips and drabs.
Okay, right. So let's move on to these circus-related images, and there's still got the Contortionist link in there that you mentioned earlier.
Yes, well, this is actually what sparked me also to photograph these young girl contortionists, because I photographed Mpixel, that's her name, in this creation here, and I just thought it's so fascinating that she actually does teach young contortionists, and she had all these connections with young girls, so she was again introducing me to all these girls. So this again is part of the Old Father Thames project, and this is a recreation of the 1814 Frost Fair, and it was the last Frost Fair that happened on the River Thames, when the river froze to such a degree that people would actually walk on the river. And in the end, I think there are about 6 or 7 of these fairs, but this was the last one, and erect these tents, and they would be like pop-up tents that they would make into shops, pubs. People would just come and sell anything and try and make a lot of money from it, because it was on the frozen fair. And then they had entertainers. So they even paraded an African elephant over the river, which God knows where they got the elephant from. But all my references, because this is like the 18th century, all my references are just from paintings or things that I've read. I don't actually have any photographs. So I believe it happened. I mean, there's a lot of write-ups about it. They had a printing. I mean, I know it happened because there's you can actually visit a museum where they actually have an old gingerbread, and they have the old printing machine that they used to actually have on the river. And I just thought it was such an interesting event that happened, so quite unbelievable. I mean, imagine the river freezing, we all walk on it. Of course, many people also, well, not many, but some people died because they just kind of, after a while that the ice is thawing, and some people just slipped under the ice. And from the beginning of my project, I really wanted to create this story, but I never knew how I was going to do it. So that was like 3 years prior. I had on my mind the whole time, do I photograph people? Do I hire an ice skating rink and then erect these tents on a big ice skating rink? Or how do I create it? In the end, I hired a huge studio in London that you could probably fit 4 double-decker buses in it, and then we created this kind of icy effect with special effects, brought in a lot of smoke, a lot of mist effect to create that kind of haze. And I brought in all these tents that I hired, and all these different, many props. and then all these people. So that I think we counted 95 people on set for 3 days, because I also created a short film, because once I spent so much time setting this up and the production side. I mean, my stylist, bless him, he actually did a fitting for each person, because they had to. We had all, we had the wealthy people, we had the beggars, we had the prostitutes, we had the thieves. So there were lots and lots of different characters. And before we go on set and before we create this and all go into the studio, we need to know who's wearing what, who's doing what. And I had to create also a storyboard of what is going to happen and what story we're trying to tell. But even if that was just for stills, I would have still done that, because you could spend all day trying to dress. I mean, we didn't have 95 models, actors. We were 95 people in total, because there's obviously gaffer, electrician, assistants, 5 hair and makeup. There was a stylist and his 2 helpers. I had 2 producers. Then we had a DOP, and yeah, there's the African elephant. I actually tried to hire an elephant, and thought, can I actually make this work? And how much would it cost? And how much am I prepared to spend? But I couldn't get one, so we had to CGI that in the end. And I had these amazing people in LA who actually animated this elephant and looked so real in the short film. And here you see the behind the scenes. Yeah, as I say, this was the last one, because it nearly killed me. It was just kind of such a massive production. And I think we got into the studio at 7 in the morning and didn't leave until 3 in the morning each day, because I just needed more time. But more time is more money that I'm spending on these production and these setups. But yeah, I did it in the end.
So with regards to the cost, we've had a few questions actually because of the size and the scale of your shoots. How do you finance them, and how can you be confident that you'll get the return to help pay for them? Is that something that you've just you've built up over time, or is there some sort of calculation you use maybe?
Well, there's one thing I don't ever do, but I should, and that is work out beforehand how much how much each project's going to cost me. But if I did, I wouldn't do the shoot.
Okay.
So I don't do that. I fund it by doing my advertising shoots. So that funds it. My print sales fund it. If for example this setup was a commercial shoot, it would cost easily 150,000, I can imagine, if you really worked out everybody's day rate and their fees, and paying everybody the proper wage, what they should be paid. But I'm very, very fortunate that I have people who believe in the project, and they come in and they do it for less fees, and that helps me. And the post-production, I've got great guys who work with me, and again, they believe in the ideas, and I've got a track record of winning awards, which helps, and they do it most of the time cost-free. The post, because again, that don't forget, that side can be very pricey. I always pay my models. I always get model release forms in case someone one day says, I didn't want to be on this shoot. But yeah, it's a costly expense. And, some projects are costly. And if I look at my COVID project, Looking Up From Within, it cost me pretty much nearly nothing, because I was photographing people at home. But that one has had the most publicity, and it's still running in papers and magazines, and I'm still being interviewed. So I think for me, I can't think about obviously I have to think about the cost, but I have to shoot first and foremost what's important to me and try and work it out how I can create it and who I can get on board to do it at a reasonable price.
Going back to your locked-in project, we've got a question from Brian actually, and saying, do you compensate or pay your street cast models? And he's given an example. You know, do you give them a print of the final image, for example? Is there any way that you sort of work like that with people sometimes?
Everybody who comes on my set will always get paid, and everybody will always, as I said, sign a model release.
Mm-hmm.
Those it was a bit awkward, not awkward, but with looking up from within, I reached out, they came forward. That was a completely different way that, yes, they get prints. I didn't pay them, and they didn't sign model releases, but I have got an agreement that if I were to sell an art print, for example, that they will get paid. So it's a different way around than how I normally work, because normally I clear that all up front. But in this case, it felt strange to, you know, say, who wants to be part of this project, and then photograph them, and then shove a model release in front of their face. So I kind of left it, and I also didn't know how the project was going to take off. And sometimes we need model releases for competitions. And for example, if I would have gotten into the Taylor Wessing, which is the National Portrait Gallery, I would have had to have a model release. In that case, I would have gone back to the person that I photographed and say, look, are you happy to be in the National Portrait Gallery, for example? Yeah. Or are you happy to be here or there? So what I am doing is, because this project is kind of traveling at the moment to various places and being shown, you know, out of Europe, or even if it were in Europe, I am contacting each person saying, are you happy to be part of this? And are you happy now to sign a model release?
Okay, well, so that's the end of our images, and we're pretty much on time. We've got a few minutes left, and I understand you've got children to pick up from school, so we're going to need to finish on time. So we've got a question from Max. What kind of limited print runs do you do for your projects and shoots, or does this vary per project?
It varies. It varies. Sorry.
Or is it limited, or is it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, yeah. Everything is all the images are limited edition. I keep my numbers very, very low, and the price is high. So the largest size is so they're 50 by 40 inches, and that's edition of 7. And then they're 30 by 40 inches, an edition of 10. And I think what's really important to know is, and not everybody knows this, that once you stick to that limited edition, you should never add another edition, because that will really, really upset the collectors. Because don't forget, they are investing in your art, they're investing in you as a established art photographer, and then once you add another edition, it just doesn't look good. So you've got to kind of stick to it once you've decided on that. I think you can bring the prices up and down as long as all the galleries are in the same. You know, if you've got more than one gallery, you've got to make sure that everybody is on the same board, that not one gallery is selling higher than them or lower than the other, because that will really mess up the whole system.
Okay, and then a related question from John actually is, how many sort of series of images do you have in each project? Is there like a magic number, or again, does that vary depending on your subject?
I always try and shoot at least about 12 or 15. And I always have, in the back of my mind, I always have a little plan to possibly get a book published with the work. I mean, Looking Up From Within probably had more images, maybe up to 20. Old Father Thames, probably something like 15. But sometimes I try and, for example, when I don't bring the sex workers up, but when I photograph them in their sets, I would then also photograph and do portraits of them, just in case, you know, if I were ever to get the book published and we've only got 15 images, it's not very much. So, and in fact, I did get a book published, but it was self-published, that I was able to make it a bigger, you know, bigger, thicker book than just 15 images.
Okay. Question from Brian. What would be your dream shoot if you could shoot anywhere in the world on any subject? What would be your ultimate project that you haven't yet been able to do?
Oh. I don't know. I mean, the one thing I get asked to do, and something that I wish I'd done before I had children, is artist residencies. I hear about art photographers going off for a month, any time between, gosh, it can last a year, where they go somewhere. I mean, I love Japan. I love to spend a whole year in Japan on an artist residency and just shoot there and create, you know, setups but you know, it's something that I just can't do. I'm gonna have to do it when the kids have left home, and hopefully I'm not gonna be too old for that then. I'll still have the, you know, the same energy and passion that I have now. But yeah, I think artist residencies are amazing. In fact, I'm doing one in Metz next year, and I was asked to go anywhere between 1 and 3 months, and I just had to narrow down to 1 week. But I said, look, I'll spend time on it, but I have to do it from London and do all the research and all the preparation from London, then I'll come and shoot for a week. But yeah, probably, yeah, there's no specific idea, but that's what I would love to do, spend a year in Japan.
Okay. A question from Eddie. Do you find that you sometimes want to go back to some of your previous ideas, or do you have it that once you've finished it, that's it, you never go back?
I tend not to go back, but the River Thames project, this is something that, because in this project, each image has got its own story. The only thing that is connecting that project is the river. So therefore, I could pick that idea up anytime and shoot along the river anytime in the future, and I'm sure I will. So for me, in my head, that project is not quite complete yet. It's complete, but I'm still open-minded when I walk along the river, when I read things, and I'm reading a lot of books in the history of the river and jotting down ideas for the future. So that one I would probably go back to. And then yes, I'm still working on the Contortionist, but all the other projects in my mind are definitely closed. Oh, except the lockdown. You know, if we're gonna have another lockdown, as I say, I've just done 2 shoots recently. It's just I'm still looking at those interesting windows or interesting people to photograph, because the way I approached that was, as I mentioned, I reached out to my local area, but now that we can travel further, I would either approach people that I photographed in the past and think they look interesting and ask if I could photograph them in their homes, or I would see a window that I find interesting and put a letter through the letterbox saying, would you like to be part of this project? So there's different avenues that I can approach now that this lockdown has eased more.
Okay, and without giving away too many of your ideas and secrets, have you got other ideas that you're planning to work on in the near future, all being well with lockdowns and things like that?
Well, it really is the art residency in Metz. It came at a really good time. They contacted me 2-3 weeks ago and said, do you want to do this in March? No, sorry, January, February. So it's quite soon. And so I'm focusing on that. That's kind of given me a focal point, whereas I didn't have an idea, no. And it's come at a nice time that someone else has come to me. But then again, they haven't come to me with an idea. They've come to me and said, and asked me what I want to photograph. And when I found out that actually I can have access to all these amazing locations, like it's meant to be they're meant to have the most beautiful train station. They've got a very old library. There's a castle. I just thought it'd be nuts to lock myself in a studio for a week and construct sets when I can actually have access to these incredible locations. So I'll definitely take advantage of that, and that is the next project. So it's kind of come to me a little bit.
Okay, well, we'll bring it to an end there. Thank you very much, Julia, for talking to us and taking the time. We've had some really good positive feedback from the audience. Thanking you for sort of your personal approach and being so humble and sharing your inspirations and some of your tips and tricks. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hopefully see you again soon once we're able to socialize a bit more.
Yeah, that'd be great. Take care.
Okay, so just to finish off before we leave, as usual, if you could be so kind to help give us some feedback through our afterwards survey that should pop up when you leave the webinar. That's really good, helps us to understand what we're doing well, what we could do better, and different bits and pieces that you'd like to see. And another reminder that the webinar is being recorded, so it will be up on our YouTube channel either later this evening or tomorrow at the latest. So you can watch it back there, as well as all the other webinars we've done over recent months with different photographers and on different subjects. And then just to finish off, for anything Hasselblad, of course, we've got hasselblad.com. So you can see all our other future webinars and events listed on there. Find out more about our products and our partner network. Lots of inspiration from other photographers like Julia. Lots on our history. And you can, of course, request more info on our products as through a demo or any support on products you may have as well. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on another webinar soon. Thank you very much.